So, with the first official Oscar contender of the 2020 season officially coming out tomorrow, being Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I thought it'd be a pretty good time to sit back down and talk about 4 more potential Oscar contenders for this 2020 season. It's already pretty loaded. I believe we talked about 6 in the Volume 1 edition of 2020 Early Oscar Contenders. So if you don't hear the film that you're expecting me to talk about in this and you missed the first video, there's a relatively solid chance that I've already talked about the film you're looking for in that video, so it's worth checking that one out. And I'll also be doing a Volume 3 in about a month or so after a little bit more time has passed. Maybe some more trailers come out, maybe some more news happens, all sorts of good stuff. Release dates can shift all the time. So, keep your eyes open in case the film that you're looking for does not appear on this list. I'm glad I waited until later in the day today to film this video. It's very late at night because 2 pretty big things happened today as I'm shooting this video. I totally lost track of that sentence. I'm going to try that sentence again. 2 very important things happened today that sort of fall into line with what I'm talking about here. One of those things is that all 4 of the films that I'm discussing today are appearing in the TIFF lineup in competition and in special presentation. All 4 of the films that I'm about to discuss are in the TIFF lineup, which is a pretty big deal. TIFF is always a very big precursor to the Oscars. It very commonly follows Venice, which the Golden Lion has proved to be pretty beneficial in predicting at least a few things and dictating a few frontrunners in some categories the last 2 years. And with Green Book taking TIFF by storm last year, it's important to be looking at the very least at the lineup of those films. So it's pretty good on me, I guess, for picking 4 films that wound up on the TIFF lineup. And on top of that, the very first film that we're talking about today had a trailer drop today. And if you can't figure out what it is yet, it is Taika Waititi's Jojo Rabbit. That's the first film we're going to be talking about. Ironically enough, 3 of the 4 films I'm talking about today have trailers, but only one of them has critic reviews, and that's the one that hasn't had a trailer yet. So I don't know if you can piece that together before I get to it, then good on you. So the trailer, as well as a few scattered tweets, sort of confirmed the suspicions that I'd had when it came to this film, and its tone, and how that might actually benefit it in pushing it towards some Academy Awards campaigning, is that it seems as though it's nailing this concept of satire, yet kind of breaking your heart, giving you reason to care for the characters, for the plot line, the actual story itself. And in recent years, it's kind of been proven to us through the Academy Awards and their choices for nominations and even certain wins that they are a fan of satirical films that take on real stories, or maybe not even biopics, but really grounded topics and concepts, and then add a little bit of originality to it. I think with films like Get Out and The Favorite recently, I think those are 2 very prime examples of movies that add a little bit of levity to some pretty intense and visceral and real topics that need to be addressed. And the Academy honored both of those films in pretty hefty manners in the last 2 years, and I think Jojo Rabbit kind of has the potential this year to maybe be that film. We're centering around what seems to be a Hitler Youth who seems to reside in his fictitious imagination of Adolf Hitler, being played by Taika Waititi, a Jewish individual, which is obviously a pretty big thing for this film. He's quoted as saying, "What bigger fuck you to that guy," which I think is the perfect way of phrasing that. But the Academy has been getting better and better at awarding originality in these types of films. Yorgos Lanthimos' direction of The Favorite and his dark comedy was awarded when many years ago would have been like, no, Mary Queen of Scots, the very basic, epic, historical drama, will be the one to take accolades over The Favorite. Or the same thing with Get Out, where you wouldn't expect a comedy horror film to land anywhere in the Academy Awards nominations, and yet it did. And I think you could be looking at something very similar with this film. I think the trailer highlights a lot of the comedic aspects of it, but Taika Waititi has proved he's really great at making comedy films that tug a little bit at your heartstrings, that actually you wind up walking out of and going, there was a point to that that stuck with me emotionally, and that's what the Academy voters like, even though his films haven't been awarded before, but I'll get into why I think that is in a little bit. You've got Boy, you've got Hunt for the Wilder People. I haven't seen What We Do in the Shadows, but I've been led to believe there's a little bit of that in there. Thor Ragnarok was his Marvel outbreak, but he's a familiar name now, which is a big thing. You know, you want your film to get more attention, and people are looking for the next Taika Waititi film, and I think this one is so out there, people are going to be drawn to it. Plus, it seems as though the production company, as well as Waititi himself, are relatively confident in this film's ability to be nominated for Oscars as a result of its mid-October release date, which is pretty prime for Oscars. It's not my favorite. October isn't the greatest place to be, in my opinion. A Star is Born sort of proves that from last year, that really kind of fell off after having been a heavy frontrunner for most of the year preceding October. But none of his films before have even seen the light of an award season release. Yes, they've been released in film festivals, but usually like something like Hunt for the Wilder People coming out, I believe, in June, or Boy coming out in March. I think What We Do in the Shadows was in May. So, you know, this seems to be the first time a production company, as well as the director himself, seem relatively confident enough in its ability to be nominated for awards that they're putting it in an award season release date, which I think is what you like to see out of them. Plus, the film looks great. It's shot really well, the production value looks really strong, and it looks like it's going to be really funny, but also have a lot of emotional depth, which, as I've said, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, is what the Oscars are looking for. The cast is really interesting. You've got a lot of really talented individuals. You've got Taika Waititi, obviously. You've got Scarlett Johansson, who's never been nominated for an Oscar, and many are arguing, including myself, that she could be due for a performance very time soon. You've got new Academy favorite Sam Rockwell, nominated 2 times in the last 2 years, one of which picking up a win, maybe looking at another supporting actor nomination from him. Personally, I don't see those happening. I don't know if Jojo Rabbit's going to be the film to propel performances forward. And then you've got like Rebel Wilson in there, which is, you know, an odd thing. You've never really seen her do any drama, but I definitely think Jojo Rabbit is one to look out for a slew of different reasons. The second film I want to talk about has had a trailer for a little bit longer now, I would say about a month, I think, and it is Ford v Ferrari, the true story of the Le Mans race in which Henry Ford II set out on a journey to defeat Ferrari, recruiting Ken Miles and Carroll Shelby, I believe is his name, or Shelby Carroll Shelby, one of the two. What's interesting about this film is it reminds me of the kind of Taika Waititi Marvel treatment, where James Mangold now, in mainstream film, right, seems to kind of be now the director of Logan, right? Even though Wolverine didn't do that to him because it wasn't very well critically received, but Logan was so well received, not just by critics, but by audiences, that people are looking forward to whatever James Mangold comes out with next. Even though Logan isn't entirely a Marvel film, it was well received enough that people are kind of giving him the superhero director treatment. And as a result, even though Logan in itself had success at the Academy Awards, picking up a Best Adapted Screenplay Academy Award nomination, which I believe is the first superhero film ever to do that. I don't think The Dark Knight picked up a screenplay nomination. So even though that film, in terms of Oscars, the way I see it, was a success, people forget that James Mangold isn't really a stranger to Oscar nominations. He's made a couple of films that have picked up some technical noms, like 3:10 to Yuma, but he's also directed 2 Academy Award-winning performances, one out of Angelina Jolie in Girl Interrupted, and one out of Reese Witherspoon in Walk the Line. Way back when, the last time James Mangold made a biopic for Walk the Line, in which Reese Witherspoon picked up an Academy Award, it was relatively successful amongst Oscar voters and in a pretty solid slew of categories across the board. Didn't make it in a picture, but that was back when they were only putting 5 in, and I think if they were putting 10 in, Walk the Line would have been a shoo-in as at least a nomination. So it's interesting to see him kind of back on the biopic game, and the film looks interesting, that's for sure. I think the trailer is a little weird, but by that same token, I think they're marketing it in a way that they're trying to get people to go see it. I think they're trying to make it look more intense than it's probably going to be. I think it's going to be a lot more grounded, in depth, growth and more of a character study, it seems, at least on Christian Bale's character. So the trailer is a little hard to make judgments from, but it looks well shot, it looks intricate, it looks detailed. It's technically, I guess you could say, a period piece in a sense. It seems to develop the era of the 60s pretty well. And I think with a very strong cast all across the board, as Mangold has proved, he can direct Academy Award-winning performances, or at the very least nominated performances. So I think it could be interesting to see how 20th Century Fox would campaign Matt Damon or Christian Bale. I think Christian Bale would probably have a better chance when it comes to nominations this time around, as A, he's always kind of an Academy Award nominee favorite, and B, he seems to be the emotional center of the film. It looks like Matt Damon is just kind of there to back him, but it'll also be interesting to see who they campaign as lead and supporting. I think that'll be part of the deciding factor of that. Like I brought up, Fox knows kind of how to campaign. They're no stranger to campaigning Oscar films. They're a very well-known, high-budget Academy corporation, and now that they're owned by Disney, I think Disney's going to maybe even try and push it a little further, especially with that prime November, mid-November release date. That's one of my favorite release dates. I think November and December is really where you want to be. And this film is right smack dab in the middle of that. That screams confidence to me in the film. And I think that that's going to be a very big thing carrying it forward. I guess the question is where it'll be. Right now, if the film it winds up being as strong as I think it could be, I think picture is a for sure nomination. I think screenplay is probably a good bet. Director might be a little more of a stretch. It doesn't seem to be going too crazy in terms of doing anything directorial-wise that I think Mangold could get thrown in there, but maybe Christian Bale, maybe even Matt Damon. It kind of depends on where they campaign whom. It's a timely film as well. Lee Iacocca, who was played by John Bernthal in the film, recently passed away. I don't know if they're going to do any kind of thing with that. I'm sure the film will be at the very least dedicated to him, considering how recent his passing was. But I live in Michigan. It's a very big deal that this film is coming out here. I know they're talking about some premiere-esque stuff happening in the States. So I think it's going to make a pretty big boom when it drops, and I think it's going to have the ability to carry some of that momentum, especially if the film is great. And the way I'm looking at it, it has every right to be great. The only thing that concerns me is it's got a really weird team of writers who have written some films that just aren't very good, but every now and then you have a film like this that can... When you have a strong subject and you have good source material, you can get writers to really find some inspiration, kind of bounce ideas off of each other well enough, and have a director who knows how to translate that into really good work, especially with a cast so strong who can even sometimes make not as great dialogue sound good. I really think Ford v Ferrari is one to look out for. It's definitely one to check out when November rolls around, and I think it could be a very big contender in a lot of different categories, especially technical categories in something like cinematography, sound editing, sound design, production design, all that stuff. I think it's definitely one to check out. The third film I want to talk about is one that was brought up on stream to me. Actually, I watched the trailer on stream, and I promised I would talk about this movie because I think it's an interesting case in terms of Oscars, is The Goldfinch, which is the new John Crowley film. I believe the only film I'm talking about out of these four that isn't technically historical really at all. Jojo Rabbit's no biopic, but it takes place in a historical era. This is just sort of a work of fiction to my knowledge. Yeah, it's based off of a novel. And it was adapted by Peter Strahan, who is himself a familiar Oscar individual. He was nominated back in 2011 for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Hasn't been nominated since, but I think maybe this could be a solid chance for him to come back. Now, the reason I'm talking about this film is, if you're a follower of this channel at all, you know that there's one thing that I think can be almost an automatic disqualification to any Oscar contender, anyone who wants to be nominated for an Academy Award but won't be. And the answer to that is a September release date. You never, ever want to release in September. Especially in these past couple of years, there have been far too many instances of films releasing in September that have simply been masked by better films and more poignant films that have come out in October, November, and December, and even a few in limited release in January, early January. September films just get buried by other movies, and they find themselves in those 6th and 7th places, and they never really seem to shine. Examples that I can think of are like Black Mass, which was a complete vehicle to get Johnny Depp nominated, but he fell under once other films came out with better performances and performances that managed to gain that momentum because they were around closer to the nominations. They were fresher in Academy voters' minds. Something like Stronger, which is a really great film, in my opinion, that perfectly should have warranted Jake Gyllenhaal and Tatiana Maslany both Oscar nominations, fell under the radar for the same exact reasons. And the Goldfinch has that middle of September release date, which really irks me. Now, last time I talked about a film with a September release date was last year with Boy Erased, and about 30 minutes after I published the video, they pushed the release date back to November. So I'm being very careful with talking about this film, but there's a trailer out, there's posters, they've started to market this film, and it seems like it's going to be released in September. I don't know exactly even if it's going for Oscar contention. It is on the TIFF lineup, which is a good sign, usually when you're at the very least going to campaign even. It's not a biopic, it's not a true story, which even with like Black Mass and Stronger, even those had those going for it, and didn't really pan out for either of those films. Those are just two examples. Somebody threw Moneyball out as an example to me of a September release that did have success in Academy nominations, and I agree with you, but anytime Aaron Sorkin writes pretty much anything, at the very least film-wise, since Charlie Wilson's War in 2007, it's going to be nominated somewhere, right? Whether just in screenplay, in a couple of performances, or all across the board. When Sorkin writes a movie, you can probably bet your ass it's going to be somewhere. So Sorkin's Sorkin. But that September release date, man, it just really bugs me, especially when you don't have the easy biopic out. And what I think the film does have some things going for it that I think could propel it forward. A really strong cast. A cast of really talented actors whom, like Nicole Kidman, which the Academy loves, even Ansel Elgort, who's on the up and up constantly. I think you do have a really strong overall ensemble that could lead to possible nominations there. You also have John Crowley, who directed Brooklyn, which was in itself a success when it came to Oscar nominations. It took 3, but they were 3 in pretty sizable categories. You had a picture nomination, a leading actress nomination for Saoirse Ronan, and you had an adapted screenplay nomination, I believe, or an original screenplay. It was one of the two. But he's obviously no stranger to the Oscars, but what I really think could be the big thing pushing it is Roger Deakins, who is the cinematographer on the film. Did a little bit of math, and since 2000, he's pretty much got a 60% nomination to non-nomination ratio in terms of years, right? 60% of the years since 2000, he's been nominated for an Oscar. At least one Oscar. I think in 2008, he was nominated for 2. Whatever year No Country for Old Men was nominated, I believe that was 2008, he was nominated for 2. So, that's, you know, he could flip a coin and have 10% more odds that he was going to be nominated for an Academy Award. And I think he'd even have a better ratio if back by like Shawshank, that era, he was focusing more on just doing 1 or 2 films a year. That was back when he was cinematographer on like 3 or 4, which is, I think, a lot of what hurt him ultimately in not having more nominations, even though the guy's got a shitload. And in recent years, he's mainly been focusing on 1 film or 2 films a year. This year he's focusing on 2, The Goldfinch and 1917. And more often than not, you see him pop up, and the film from the trailer looks beautiful. It's shot pretty flawlessly in at least those 2.5 minutes worth of footage, and I think Deakins being something of a shoo-in for cinematography nomination could be something that propels this film forward. That being said, unless 1917, which is a Sam Mendes film, which are he's also no stranger to Academy Awards, unless they decide to campaign cinematography there, then I think this film is really fucked. But I think Deakins could act as just a little bit of a propeller forward to go, hey, pay a little bit of attention to this film, because you've already got Deakins as cinematographer, you know you're going to be paying attention to it already for that element alone. take into account the direction, take into account the performances, all that kind of stuff. We're going to have to wait and see on this one. Like I said, September release date. It's going to have to be a really great film, and it's really going to have to stick in people's minds, which is very difficult to do with that release date. The final and fourth film I'm going to be talking about is the one that does not have a trailer yet, but does have critic reviews, is The Report, I believe being directed and written by Scott Z. Burns, a relatively new face when it comes to Academy Awards. The Report broke out pretty well at Sundance, receiving some pretty strong critical reception out of just initial critics who saw it. People really love this movie, which is odd considering there's no trailer or anything or a poster, but it is on the TIFF lineup, which is a good sign, and having that early Oscar talk can be a big thing. If you're able to just sort of transcend through all of these months, right, kind of make your ground at Sundance, hit TIFF, maybe even Venice, I'm not positive if this film is going to be in Venice, and then hit your release and manage to stick in people's minds through those months, hit the Golden Globes, hit all that stuff. That's sort of the track that you want to follow. There is one thing frightening me about that. It is another September release. However, it's very late in September, which I'm willing to be a little lenient on, and it gets an online release early in October. Someone did point out to me the Oscars are, I believe, 2 weeks earlier this year, so I guess that kind of gives a little bit of wiggle room, but September is still a little worrisome to me because even with the Oscars being 2 weeks earlier, studios are still probably focusing their films in those October, November, and December release dates, so September is still not the place you want to be, but it's late enough in September where I'm willing to be a little bit more lenient to it as opposed to something like the Goldfinch, which is just smack dab in the middle of September, but something that I do think benefits it even with that September release date is the film has been seen already. The film has been seen and the film has been liked, and it's going to hit TIFF, which is going to be another kind of point in the relay race that's going to give it a little bit more propulsion into that release date, which is probably going to be very, very shortly after. I think it's like maybe 2 weeks after. It's Amazon Studios, who has had some pretty solid luck in their campaigning. Usually they get one or two pretty great campaigns every year. Manchester by the Sea back in 2016 was very successful at the Oscars. The Big Sick did decently okay. I think its July release date really wound up hurting it. I think if you put that thing in like October or November, you could have seen it all over the place. I think its release date cost Holly Hunter a nomination. I think it cost it a Best Picture nomination, which is too bad because it was a great film. But even last year, something like Cold War was a pretty immense success for Amazon Studios, showing up in a lot of places you wouldn't expect a foreign film to be in. Best Director, cinematography, all over the board. I know the Goldfinch is also an Amazon release, but it's being distributed by Warner Brothers, so the campaigning is a little different. I think The Report is probably going to be Amazon Studios' focus in terms of campaigning. They picked it up really quick after Sundance, if I recall correctly. The cast is strong. Adam Driver, obviously coming hot off a nomination. He seems to be the one driving the film. You got Annette Bening, who is a classic Oscar favorite, I believe, with 4 nominations for an Oscar, maybe 5. It's 4. You got Corey Stoll, you got John Hamm. It's got perfect subject matter for the Academy Awards. There aren't many films centering around 9/11, and this is tackling a different angle of that, which I think the Academy will be very interested in. The last film I can think of that was successful from as a result, like that touched on 9/11 was Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which picked up a good amount of nominations, including one in Best Picture. I honestly think The Report is one that's definitely going to pick up nominations. I have a gut feeling about it, especially considering how strong the critical reception has been for it. I think the Academy is really going to love this. I think they're going to find it really interesting to see the new way, or not the new way, the new area of this incident they're touching on. It's always kind of fascinating to see these types of films, especially when they're done well and with respect and with great performances, with great direction and great writing. And it seems that this is that film. I'm going to keep kind of sitting back on it. I'm going to wait for a trailer, and I'm going to wait to see how it does at TIFF, because that September release date still irks me a little bit. But we're going to see. We're going to find out very, very soon. But that's going to do it for this volume of early 2020 Oscar contenders. Like I said, there will be another volume probably coming in about a month or so where we'll talk about 4 or 5 other contenders before we start actually getting to see the movies, reviewing the movies. I'm going to do some film festival recaps when Venice and TIFF happen. I usually do videos on both of those. Those are very important, in my opinion, in terms of what's going to end up taking some Oscar nominations, as well as some big-time Oscars. Tomorrow, I'm going to have my Once Upon a Time in Hollywood review out. It should be late tomorrow, but I'm going to film the review right after I see it, so keep your eyes open for that. That'll be pretty cool, back-to-back uploads. But thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think of these 4 films, or what other film you want me to touch on. I do use your guys' comments often as movies to look into. I'm looking into Joker right now as a movie to talk about next time, so keep your suggestions coming. They help a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.